Good morning, Andhra Pradesh. Welcome to all the teachers, headmasters, deputy DOs, DOs, and all the state officials who are watching this interactive webinar on the special topic on basics of a spoken discourse in language. Yesterday also we witnessed many teachers for this webinar, eagerly waiting for this second session. Our officials also in the due course will join and address you. In the meantime, I request Ismail Garu to introduce our resource person. Please, Ismail.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Welcome to day 2 CLEP-2 Spoken English series. I welcome you all. Then today we have Mr. Suman Bandi as resource person. As you are well aware of Suman Bandi, sir. Sir is a teacher trainer. He is from Regional Institute of English, Bangalore. He has known for his training. Today's topic is very interesting topic. Let us see. That is basics of a spoken discourse in a language. So with this, Suman Bandi sir, welcome to you for this today's session. Please, namaste. Please continue your session, sir.
Okay. Good morning, dear teachers. I hope you are all doing well. I welcome you to second series of CLEP-2 training programs, which is the Spoken English series. And today is webinar 2. And today's topic for discussion will be basics of a spoken discourse in a language. So as all of you know, this entire series will be focusing on understanding the important aspects of spoken English, and these sessions are prepared with objectives of enhancing our spoken English capabilities. So as all of you know, yesterday Shobha madam has introduced you to the concept of spoken English, why spoken English is important, and some important facts that we need to know if we want to improve our spoken English, and what should be our attitude when we are going to improve, or when we have this goal of improving spoken English. So today onwards we'll get into details of various aspects of spoken English. So in that part, today's session is going to focus on basics of a spoken discourse in a language. So today's session we are going to look at all those basic aspects and various features of spoken English which are important for us. This awareness is important for us when we have to improve, or when we have an objective in our spoken English. So the understanding of these basics can help us be better learners and better teachers of spoken English. So what are we going to look at today's session? So in today's session, we'll talk about first, what is a discourse? Because in order to understand how spoken discourse can be learned first, and it is different from other discourses, it is important that we understand what is a discourse, and what are the types of discourse, and what is the difference between speech and writing. Though both are modes of communication, what is the difference? Are there any differences between speech and writing? If there are any differences, knowing these differences can help us learn spoken English better, or help us learn to be better speakers. And we are also going to talk about what are the notions of grammaticality and accent, and what is the relevance of this understanding in trying to improve our spoken English capacities. And we are also going to talk about the aspects like fluency and accuracy, and what are the implications of understanding these concepts while learning or teaching spoken English, and what are paralinguistic features of speech. So what are these features, and how do these features help us in being better speakers. So how can these paralinguistic features help us in communicating better while speaking? And apart from paralinguistic features, are there any features of spoken English which makes it different from writing? And how can the understanding of these features help us be better speakers? And lastly, we are going to look at what is called grammar of spoken English. So is there anything called grammar of spoken makes it different from the traditional grammar that we know? So these understandings, these awareness, the awareness of understanding all these different aspects can help us learn our spoken English in a better way. We are not only learners of English, but we are also teachers of English. So the understanding of all these aspects can help us be better speakers. So all these things, various aspects that we are going to discuss today, are not directly relevant for us as users of language. Some of these aspects, like paralinguistic features, for example, are directly related to us as teachers and learners. So, an understanding of these aspects can definitely.
Our dynamic director of CRT has just joined.
Okay, sir.
Please,
Should I stop
please,
sharing the
yeah,
screen?
please pause your presentation for a while.
Yes.
I request Dr. B. Pratap Reddy Garu, director of CRT. Pratap Reddy sir, I request you to kindly address the viewers.
థ్యాంక్ యూ. అందరికీ నమస్కారం అండి. మరి ఈ కోవిడ్ మరి పాండమిక్ పీరియడ్ లో కూడా మనకి రాష్ట్ర వ్యాప్తంగా ఉపాధ్యాయులందరూ కూడా చాలా ఉత్సాహంగా మనకి ఈ ట్రైనింగ్ ప్రోగ్రామ్ ని అందరూ కూడా తీసుకోవడం, 1 lakh టీచర్స్ పైగా మనకి దీంట్లో పార్టిసిపేట్ చేయడం సంతోషదాయకం. దీనికి అంతటికీ మనం గమనిస్తే మూల కారణం వెట్రిశైలి మేడం గారు, స్పెషల్ ఆఫీసర్ అండ్ డైరెక్టర్ సిమెట్ మేడం గారు చాలా కీన్ గా మనకి అబ్జర్వ్ చేసుకుంటూ టీచర్స్ కి ఏది ఉపయోగమో, మన పిల్లలకి ఏది బాగుంటుందనే ఉద్దేశంతో ఆ బిట్స్ కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ కావచ్చు, మరి ఈ ట్రైనింగ్ షెడ్యూల్ కావచ్చు, యాప్ కావచ్చు, నేషనల్ అండ్ ఇంటర్నేషనల్ మనకి బెస్ట్ ప్రాక్టీసెస్ కూడా అన్ని కూడా మన వెట్రిశైలి మేడం గారు గమనించి ఈ యాప్స్ అంటే ఇప్పుడు మన ఎస్సిఆర్టీ ఏదైతే చేస్తున్నారో ఇవన్నీ కూడా మాకు ముందుండి మనకి మేడం గారు నడిపిస్తా ఉన్నారు. మరి మేడం గారికి మనకి ఈ టీచర్స్ మనకి ఈ విధమైనటువంటి ప్రోగ్రెస్ తో ముందుకు సాగుతున్న ఈ కార్యక్రమాలు అంటే మాకు వెట్రిశైలి మేడం గారు మాకు చాలా ప్రోత్సాహకరంగా ఉన్నారు. అదేవిధంగా మా కమిషనర్ స్కూల్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ చివర్స్ ఏ కార్యక్రమం చేసినా కూడా మేము ఉన్నాము. వెబినార్ చూస్తాం. వెబినార్ లో మన ప్రిన్సిపల్ సెక్రటరీ సార్, అదేవిధంగా మన గౌరవనీయులు మన సురేష్ సార్ గారు, మినిస్టర్ గారు కూడా నిన్న రివ్యూలో కూడా మనకి అధికారులందరూ కూడా ఈ విషయం పైన క్షుణ్ణంగా నివేదిక కూడా ఇవ్వడం జరిగింది. మీ నుంచి చాలా అద్భుతమైనటువంటి రెస్పాన్స్ ఉంది కాబట్టి మనకి ఈ అంటే నాలాంటి తెలుగు మీడియం బ్యాక్గ్రౌండ్ గారికి ప్రత్యేకంగా ఐ సే స్పెషల్ థ్యాంక్స్ టు సుమన్ బండి గారు.
థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్ సార్. థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్ సార్. ప్రతాప్ రెడ్డి సార్ వచ్చి డైరెక్టర్ ఆఫ్ ఎస్సీఆర్టీ అందరినీ అడ్రస్ చేయడం ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేస్తున్నాము. అలాగే వ్యూయర్స్, అలాగే వాళ్ళంతా ఇంతమంది టీచర్స్ ఈ లాక్డౌన్ టైంలో ఈ మంచి కార్యక్రమానికి అటెండ్ అవుతున్నారు అంటే ఇలాంటి కార్యక్రమాన్ని డిజైన్ చేసి వాటిని ఎగ్జిక్యూట్ చేసి మాలాంటి వాళ్ళందరినీ కూడా తీసుకొచ్చి ఈ చేయమని చెప్పి మీ అందరికీ ఈ మంచి మంచి రిసోర్స్ పర్సన్స్తో మంచి టాపిక్స్ చెప్పిస్తున్నారు అంటే ద ఎంటైర్ క్రెడిట్ గోస్ టు మన మిస్ వెట్రిశైలి మేడం, ఐఏఎస్ ఆఫీసర్, స్పెషల్ ఆఫీసర్. సో మేడం గారికి ఆన్ బిహాఫ్ ఆఫ్ ఆల్ ది టీచింగ్ కమ్యూనిటీ మేము ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు, నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేస్తున్నాం. అలాగే మా కమిషనర్ ఆఫ్ స్కూల్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ శ్రీ చిన్నప్ప వీరభద్రుడు గారికి, ప్రిన్సిపల్ సెక్రటరీ గారికి, ఆదిమూలపు సురేష్ గారు, హ్యాండ్ఫుల్ మినిస్టర్ గారికి, అలాగే గవర్నమెంట్ ఆఫ్ ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్కి అందరికీ కూడా ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేస్తూ Sir, please continue your presentation, sir.
Welcome you all back to the session. Uh, I'm really happy that about the fact that the Andhra government is taking all such wonderful initiatives in order to help teachers during this lockdown. So I also thank Director Pratap Reddy Garu for actually referring to me, and also Vetri Selvi Madam, and in general thank the government of Andhra for taking such wonderful initiatives. And also we are happy to meet teachers to help them as we can. So thank you, sir, and we'll be back to the session. So as I was saying, this is what we'll be discussing in today's session. So we look at all these various aspects of speech and speech as a discourse. And as I said, some of these features are directly useful for us, which we can practice, and which we can practicing which we can enhance our spoken English. For example, paralinguistic features of speech. While some others are not directly relevant and helpful to us, but an understanding and awareness of these aspects can definitely help us in strategizing, in planning better strategies, both for teaching spoken English as well as to improvise our own spoken English. So first, if we have to understand all these aspects, first, we'll start by discussing what is a discourse. So, before learning or understanding how spoken English is very important and what are the features of spoken English as a discourse, it is important that we understand the meaning of discourse. So, what is a discourse? I'm sure most of you are aware of this term. Most of you would have at least heard of this term called discourse. Why am I saying this? This is because very recently, in the last few years, a new methodology or new approach in terms of teaching language called discourse oriented pedagogy, or DOP, especially mainly English teachers must be aware of this term, has been introduced. DOP has been advocated in the last few years as a better approach, as a more comprehensive approach when it comes to the teaching of language. So in this context, I'm sure most of you are aware of this term called discourse. So what is a discourse? In order to understand this term discourse better, we'll first have to look at the structure of a language. So what is the structure of a language? Right? What is the hierarchy of a language? If you can see here, this picture talks about various levels of analyzing a language, analyzing the structure of a language. So on the left hand side, as you can see, this is what refers to levels of structures. On the right hand side, levels of analysis, or the technical terminology used here. So these technical words are not that important. My focus is not going to be on these technical words, but rather I want you to focus on the left hand column, left side column, that is levels of structures. So what are we talking about here? What is the structure of a language? All languages have a certain structure. They start from something and then slowly they progress towards a higher level. So what is the most basic unit of a language? Any language, not just English. What is the most basic element or component of a language? It should be sounds. Exactly. So sounds are the most basic element of any language. When I say most basic, what do I mean? We cannot divide that language into further components. That is what refers to the most basic component in a language. So I'm sure all of you agree with me. Sounds represent the most basic component of all language. So all languages constitute, the constitution of languages basically starts from the sound level. So if you look at the sound level, are languages different from each other? Not really. Languages don't differ much in terms of sounds. What do I mean by this? All languages basically are constituted by the combination of various sounds. So at sound level, all languages are more or less the same. Why do I say this? For example, if you take individual sounds like k, m, l, n, when you utter these kind of individual sounds are also called as phonemes. Are languages different? For example, is the sound l, is the sound l different from English to other Indian languages? No, the sound would be the same with respect to all the languages. If at all, there would be some minute differences. Most of the sounds in all languages are same except for one or two sounds. For example, if you take a sound in Telugu or in South Indian languages, the second la, right? When you read the Telugu alphabet or sounds, you say la, first la, and then you say second ala, ala. For example, kala, when you say art, for art kala, we talk about the second la. Now, do you think this sound exists in English? No. Even most of the North Indian languages also don't have this sound. So this sound is different in Telugu and Kannada from other Indian languages and as well as English. Now, when you compare Indian, for example, especially South Indian languages, there is a sound called ra. All of you know r, ra, right? Ra. For example, rampam, right? So this ra, all of you are aware of. This ra exists even in English. But there is a second type of ra, not the Telugu bandi ra, but there's a retroflex. We call it in phonetics retroflex ra, which is unique only to Malayalam and Tamil speakers. So most of the other language speakers in India also are not aware of this sound. Retroflex ra. For example, you might have heard of the city in Kerala called Kozhikode. So how do you pronounce? Most of them who are not aware of this sound will pronounce it as Kozhikode. So, but actually the sound is ra. Kozhikode. You're supposed to say Kozhikode. And there's a place in Kerala called Alappuzha. Most people who are not aware of this sound pronounce it as Alappuzha. So this sound is unique only to Malayalam and the Tamil languages. So this is how, when it comes to sounds, there's not much difference between languages. Most of the sounds are same, except for one or two variations. Next, sounds. After sounds, the next level of language in terms of hierarchy are words. Now, what about letters here? It is mentioned here, letters. Are letters really the combination of sounds? Yes, but letters are just code developed for writing purposes, right? So letters are not really prominent when we are looking at the basic structure of languages. So letter is just a written code, developed for written code. What is most basic is sounds. So sounds combine to form words. Now, do individual sounds have meaning? No. So sounds combine to form words, and meaning starts at the word. So sounds combine to form words, and words combine to form sentences. So meaning, as you can see, basically starts at these two levels, word level as well as sentence level. So at the word level, meaning is very, very basic. When you start combining words in order to frame sentences, the meaning gets bigger and extended. So sentences combine, when sentences combine, we call it connected speech or connected sentences. So this, in terms of linguistics, connected sentences, this is what we refer to as discourse. So now I hope all of you have a basic understanding of what is a discourse. What is a discourse? So the basic hierarchy of language is sounds combined to form letters, letters combined to form sentences, sentences combined to form discourses. So how can we, now that we have got a basic understanding of discourse, now this also leads us to two important approaches of looking at languages. You must have heard words like top-down approach, bottom-up approach. So these words can be applicable here also. So while looking at language and the structure of languages, these two are important for us as teachers. That is, top-down way of approach of looking at a language and bottom-up approach of looking at a language. So what is this bottom-up approach of looking at a language? Bottom-up approach looks at the language constitution from the very basic elements, from the bottom, that is sounds. So this approach looks at a language as a constitution of sounds, the most basic units. Then slowly the focus shifts to words, sentences, and discourses. So traditionally, our approach of teaching, most of us as teachers in the field of education, we follow the bottom-up approach, where that is why at the primary levels classes, we teach children, we familiarize with them with sounds, and then letters, and then word formation, slowly at higher level sentences, and then finally we go to discourses. We expose our students to various discourses. But what about this top-down approach? So the top-down approach looks first at the language as a whole, right? The holistic approach of looking at languages. In fact, DOP, discourse-oriented pedagogy or approach, is a way of looking at top-down approach of a language. So this approach believes in language communication happens through discourses. So they expose the students to this approach, believes in exposing students to a lot of discourses. So with this, we move on to what now we have got a basic understanding of discourse. Now we'll move on to look at how we can define discourse. So the simplest way to define a discourse is it is the smallest act of communication. Now that you have understood what makes a discourse, so sentence sounds to words, words to sentences, sentences. So anything beyond a sentence level which is used for communication. So it is the smallest act of communication. Discourse can be defined as the smallest act of communication. So discourse is one of the four systems of language, the four basic systems: vocabulary, grammar, and phonology. As you can see, discourse is the highest in that all. Here vocabulary refers to words. Grammar mainly refers to sentences, because most of the grammar operates at the sentence level. And phonology refers to sounds. Whatever we have discussed basically is put in a different way. So discourse is one of the four systems and the most important system in the hierarchy or structure of a language. So it is any piece of extended language, spoken or written, which has unity and meaning and purpose. So what are the examples of a discourse? So an example of a discourse can be as simple as a two exchange dialogue. Like for example, hi, and then hi, how are you? Fine, thanks. So this small example of a dialogue, two exchange dialogue, can be an example of a discourse. And also a very, very long essay or something such as long as a novel can also be an example of a discourse. So let us look at various discourses in use, right? So different examples of discourses are dialogues, conversations, lecture, paragraph, essay, novel, advertisement, letter. So as you can see here, we have to apply the basic definition of discourse. So discourse is any piece of communication, any piece of language which is beyond a sentence level. So which means discourse are contexts of communication. We use different discourses in different contexts of communication. For example, we use dialogues and conversations between people in the spoken mode. And the lecture as a discourse is used in the classroom by teachers and lecturers. You might have heard religious discourses, right? Religious discourses are offered in temples, mosques, and in churches. For example, on certain days, religious discourses are offered by fathers or priests in churches, and then some priests in temples, or religious people in the mosques. So a lecture that is delivered based on the philosophy of religion is called a religious discourse. Next, paragraph. Paragraph is a basic discourse when it comes to writing. It is in fact a smaller part of a larger. A paragraph can be a part of an essay. A A paragraph can be a part of a novel, a paragraph can be a part of a story. Now, advertisement. This is also a discourse. So, as you can see, discourses are various contexts in which communication happens. So, basically, we can say a statement: communication has discourses. That is why, while learning a language or while teaching a language, it is important to understand this term discourse. So each discourse type is used in each context. And as you can also see, these discourses are not same. The context varies, features also vary. Some of them we use in spoken context, some of them we use in written context, and some of them we can use in both the contexts. For example, dialogues and conversations are only used in the spoken context, right? Lectures are used are commonly the part of the spoken context. Paragraph, essay, novel, advertisement, all these are a part of both, mainly written discourses. Advertisement, for example, advertisement can be a spoken discourse as well as a written discourse. So if you see an advertisement in a newspaper, that is a written context. If you see an advertisement in the television, it is communicated basically through this oral medium or the spoken advertisement. So as all of you can see, the context varies for each of these discourses, and also features vary, right? For example, advertisement, you can't just talk about a product and say it is an advertisement, especially if you see it in a newspaper, right? It has some features to be followed. It should have a heading, it may or may not have some pictures, some information about the what is being advertised. Take for example letters. We have formal letters, informal letters. So as teachers, all of you know the features of a letter. Features, technical features like structural features like date, introduction, how to introduce, how to use aspects like salutation, signature, all these things, how to write aspects like subject and reference in letters. Emails, notices, for example, right? When a notice is issued, notice is always written mode or written context. So there is a certain language that is used as a part of issuing notices. You can't just write a notice like you think, like you speak. So as you can see, discourses is used basically can be divided into oral and written discourses. For all these contexts, discourses, the context can vary as well as the features. So students have to be exposed to all these discourses, and they have to be taught the features of this discourse so that they communicate better. And this understanding applies to us also as teachers, because when we have to improve our spoken English, we have to select discourses that are a part of spoken mode of communication, so that we increase, so that we enhance our spoken English capabilities faster. So this is one important use of understanding this or having this knowledge. So if you want to improve your spoken English faster, make sure you expose yourself to spoken discourses rather than uh, written discourses. So this is an important understanding for us as learners of spoken English. The same thing can be carried on to the classrooms as well. If we want our students to improve the spoken English, we need to expose them to a lot of spoken discourses initially rather than written discourses. Next. So this is a very important and basic step towards understanding different features of spoken English. So to understand this, we need to understand the basic differences between speech and writing. What are speech and writing? I'm sure all of you know that they are modes of communication. When we say we are using a language, what do we mean by it? We are either speaking or writing. There's no other way of communicating. Of course, there's a basic way of communicating without using a language, which we refer to as non-verbal communication. We are not talking about that. We are referring to verbal communication, communication using a language. So when you say you are using a language, There are only two ways in which you can use a language. You either speak or you write. So both are ways of using a language, because reading and listening are also ways of using language, but then they are passive, whereas these two refer to active skills, because we are producing a language here. So these two are basically ways of using a language, ways of communicating, rather we can say. So it's important that we understand these basic differences so that we can understand how speech is unique, what makes the spoken mode of communication or spoken discourses unique and different from writing. It is very important. So let us look at some of these important differences and try and understand what these differences are. So speech is primary, everyone acquires it. What do we mean by this statement? This means that spoken mode of communication is primary for all the languages. So all languages are primarily spoken, right? They are not primarily written. So first, whoever is learning a language for whatever purposes, first they need to learn the spoken mode. Only then you can go to the writing. So not everybody learns to read and write. So reading and writing have to do with literacy skills. So only somebody, when they are required in order to attain literacy for a particular purpose like education or job, people actually learn. Otherwise, people just learn. Languages are learned or primarily spoken. Next, speech is spontaneous and repetitive. Yes, speech is spontaneous and speech is spontaneous and unplanned. So what do we mean by this? Spontaneous. Do you really have time to plan your speech when you are speaking? Most of the times, no. You just have to speak without a planning. Of course, speech can be planned also in formal context. For example, if you are delivering a lecture, if you are going to deliver a seminar, if you are presenting a paper, all these are formal contexts. But most of the speech is informal. So all these informal context speech is spontaneous. You don't have time to plan your speech. It is repetitive because you cannot plan it. It's also repetitive. Whereas most of the writing is planned, right? You take a lot of time to plan what you want to write, right? You revise, you redraft, and finally you come out with the end product. So speech is mainly informal and repetitive because you don't have time for planning. It can also be repetitive. So there's a tendency while speakers are talking, people are talking, they repeat sometimes knowingly or unknowingly what they are going to communicate. But writing is mostly formal, right? That is why, as you can see, letter writing, paragraph writing, composition, essay writing, and preparing notices, all these, most of these written discourses are formal in nature. Like spoken English or speech has dialect variations. So this is something that can be understood even from our very easily from our mother tongue Telugu, right? So same language can have different dialect variations based on a region. For example, the Telugu that is spoken in Rayalaseema is different in terms of certain words and also the accent, the way you pronounce compared to the Telugu that is used in the coastal parts of Andhra Pradesh. So this is similar to all languages, including English. But writing generally doesn't have too many dialects. It has one standard dialect which follows the standard grammar, structures, and organized. Next, speakers, when you speak, you pronounce, whereas writers spell. So while speaking, if you make a mistake in pronunciation, that can lead to miscommunication. Somebody can misunderstand you. Similarly, while you are writing, you need to take care of your spelling. So if your spelling is wrong, if your grammar is wrong, you can be misunderstood. Speakers use pauses and intonation, right? They know where to stop, how to stop, why to stop, and then how to change their tone in order to assist their communication. Whereas writers use or take the help of punctuation marks like full stop, double inverted commas, hyphenation, etc. And aspects like stress, tone, rhythm, and body language add meaning while speaking. Whereas when it comes to writing, only writers can rely only upon language. This is the most important difference I would like to say or highlight here. When it comes to speaking, along with the language, all these aspects like stress, tone, rhythm, body language can also help a speaker in the process. But when it comes to writing, all these aspects care. So the only option for the writer is the language, the only tool. So this is why grammar becomes very important. The standards of grammar becomes very important in the writer. So the writer has to be dependent only on the language. All these additional tools which are available in spoken English are not there to assist the writer. Speech can be reformulated. What do we mean by this? While you are speaking, if you make some mistake, you can get immediate feedback from your audience, right? Your audience can let you know what is wrong with your speech through their body language, or they can directly tell you. So you can always reformulate it. But when it comes to writing, once you finish your writing and you post it, whether it is a letter or email or just a post, once you send it to your receiver, you cannot reformulate it. It is final. So this flexibility speech has. And in speech, meaning is primary. Whereas in writing, along with meaning, the standards, following the standards, punctuation marks, following the norms of writing, the organized structures, how to begin, how to end, all these become important in writing. So this is how speech has certain advantages when compared to the mode of writing. So I hope all of you have got now a basic understanding of the difference between speech and writing, and how speech as a discourse has certain advantages to it compared to the writing mode. Next, so these two are important notions that we need to understand because this has some functional application when it comes to spoken discourses and written discourses. So what are grammaticality and what is grammaticality? So grammaticality refers to the notion of language being grammatical or correct to certain extent. Now, grammaticality, what do I mean by grammaticality here? Is the notion of language being grammatical. So, the nature of language being grammatical. So, all of us know that grammar is very important, whether it is English or any other language. We need to be grammatical so that we can be effective in communication. But normally, when we think of grammar, what comes to our mind is, some elements like what we teach in the classes: parts of speech, tenses, prepositions, active passive voice, these kind reported speech, these kind of thing. So I am not using the word grammaticality to refer to that basic understanding of grammar. I am using grammaticality to in a broader sense, where grammaticality has to do with the notion of correctness. So whatever aspects related to correctness, including pronunciation. So just like your grammar has to be correct when you write something, similarly your pronunciation aspects also have to be correct when you are speaking. So I'm including everything related to correctness into the notion of grammaticality here. I hope you understand grammaticality now better. Next, acceptability. What is this acceptability? It is the extent to which one's language is accepted, meaning, correctness, and context. Now, all of us follow grammar to certain extent when we speak or when we write. In spite of that, we make some grammatical mistakes. So, apart from these mistakes, how far is our language meaningful? Right? How far is our language meaningful? So this decides the acceptability factor. So when you speak to somebody, when you communicate to somebody, you make mistakes. All of us do make mistakes. Some of us make more, some of us make less. This aspect applies to even our mother tongue usage. Use our mother tongue, we still make some basic mistakes. Sometimes we are aware, sometimes we are not aware of these mistakes. But in spite of that, you as a speaker, when you speak or write, when your receiver accepts your language with all your mistakes, because it is meaningful, because it is making sense, so that refers to acceptability. So these two are very, very important notions which we are going to understand better by understanding it from a context. Now let us look at a practical context of communication. Here we have two contexts. Look at the first context. Mom called me. Today is a holiday. Please close the door. So this is a context of communication where somebody is saying these utterances. The second context. Run, run. Snake coming. No kill, no kill, please. So carefully analyze the differences between these contexts of communication. Which one is more appealing to you? Which one would you more likely to accept from a meaning point of view or a communication point of view? I'm sure most of you would select context 2. Why? If you notice context 1, the sentences are fine. The choice of vocabulary is fine. The sentences are grammatically well constructed. They are complete. But if you notice, they are not related to context. So in a real life context, this context is not so unified. The grammar is definitely there, but then what kind of context is this which is not unified, which doesn't communicate with a purpose? There is no common purpose for each of these sentences to be together here in this particular context. But whereas in the second context, you can see all these utterances, they are not even complete sentences. They are just phrases, small words, run, run. So this person doesn't have enough English. He is not able to make sentences, but he has enough language to communicate what is happening in that situation. So this way we can say, in a real life context, if you compare both these contexts, the second context where there are no complete sentences, there is no grammar, formulation of grammar, etc. Snake coming, for example, no kill, please. So if you see this person, though he doesn't have enough language, he is not aware of proper grammar, he has enough language to communicate. So by comparing these two contexts, we can come to a conclusion. We can understand that what is more important from a communicative point of view. Is it grammar or is it the meaning? Then definitely we should say meaning is more important than grammar. So this is why we need to apply. This is why we need to understand the difference between grammaticality and acceptability. So out of these both concepts, though grammar context 1 is more grammatical, has more grammaticality, we still, which is more acceptable in terms of communication. So context 2 will be more, because meaning wise it makes more sense than the context. And this is why we need to understand that acceptability plays a very important role rather than grammar. Grammar is definitely very important. We are not saying grammar is not important, but it is comparatively important when it comes to acceptability, where meaningfulness or sense making is very, very important. Similarly, we need to look at to extend our understanding in a similar context. We need to understand what are fluency and accuracy. So fluency refers to one's comfort level in using a language. So how comfortable you are in using a language, that refers to fluency. Accuracy refers to correctness. How correct is your language? So again, what are the implications of this understanding? Is when we are learning, when we are beginning to learn a language, initially our primary goal is to be fluency. Fluency has to be our primary goal to attain the fluency, which means how can we develop this comfort? By learning, by exposing ourselves constantly to the context of English, the basic vocabulary, by learning the basic vocabulary and basic sentences. This level, at the fluency level, mistakes are common. can we ignore these mistakes and we continue to use language so that we gain that fluency? So this understanding is very, very important for us. Next, accuracy. So the secondary goal should be accuracy. Only after one attains certain level of fluency, we can focus on accuracy. So accuracy refers to the correctness of language. That is why in the primary classes, initially fluency is the goal, where we should ignore our learners' mistakes or errors, rather encourage them to speak, continue to speak. So if we continue to speak, the fluency develops. And accuracy can be a secondary goal which can be targeted at a slightly higher level. And that is why even at the school curriculum, we start teaching components of pronunciation and grammar slowly at the high school level. Even for us as teachers, this understanding is very, very important. Most of the teachers, I have heard from most of the teachers, sir, I know basic English, but my grammar is bad. So they hesitate to speak in English. They hesitate to open their mouth, though they have the basic and minimum and enough language. So this is why we need to understand that when it comes to spoken English, it's not always about grammar, right? It is not only about grammar, but what is called meaningfulness. So we have to make sure whether we have the minimum language to in order to express ourselves. And if we have that, we should continue to use English so that we slowly develop or reach certain fluency, and then thereby we can focus on accuracy. So this understanding is very important for us as both teachers and learners. So this also can be understood by a practical classroom situation. Here, if you see, a teacher is asking, why are you late? So different students give different responses. If you notice Veena's response, right, it is perfectly grammatical, and she also knows she has done a mistake, so she has apologized. So it's a perfect example of accuracy, accurate use of language. Look at Ravi's response. Though Ravi's response is grammatical, he has made his language unnecessarily lengthy, and moreover, on top, he has not apologized. So what is the use of language being grammatical but which is not serving the purpose? Here Ravi has perfectly used grammar, but then he has made it unnecessarily lengthy, and also sorry, and also he forgot to apologize for his mistake. So what is the purpose or use of such grammar? So it is not always about grammar, but also about making sense, knowing what to say, what not to say in a particular context. Now look at Gopi's response finally. Gopi doesn't have enough language. So he says, rain falling, umbrella no, sorry ma'am. Though Gopi doesn't have enough language, I'm sure all of you, when you look at it from acceptability point of view, Gopi has minimum basic words so that he can communicate in this context. So this is why understanding grammaticality and acceptability and understanding the implications of fluency and accuracy, what stage should we promote them, are very, very, very important. Next, so as we discussed earlier, we are going to look at some paralinguistic features. There are various features which make spoken English unique or distinct. So among them, paralinguistic features are very, very important. So what are these paralinguistic features? These are the features which help us communicate better apart from the language. So apart from the language that we use, these features in addition add meaning. If you remember, when we talked about the difference between speech and writing, we talked about this. There are many features that help in spoken language apart from the language when we are communicating. So what are these important things? These are things like body language, gestures, facial expression, tone, pitch, rhythm, accent, etc. So body language, in fact, is a very generic term. In fact, gestures, facial expressions also come into body language. So today's session, we are not going to focus on body language and related aspects. All of us know that very, very important. We talked about the importance of this, especially when we talked about TPR, if you remember in one of our previous sessions. So body language can play a very important role in teaching and learning process, in general in the communication process. All of us know that as one teachers. So we are not talking about that, focusing on those aspects now in today's session. But some of the important things that have direct relevance when spoken English are other paralinguistic features are tone, pitch, rhythm, accent, etc. So all of you must have heard these words. In today's session, we'll just be introduced to these sessions. We'll have a basic understanding of these things. And in further sessions, these aspects or these things will be dealt in detail. So these paralinguistic features of speech, such as tone, pitch, rhythm, accent, etc., are also called sometimes as prosodic features. So let's look at one or two basic examples so that we have a basic understanding of these each of these things. For example, accent. Accent refers to the way in which we pronounce words. So all of you know that there are different accents when it comes to English: the British accent, the American accent, the Australian accent, right? There's also something called the Indian accent, so which is not as standard as American or British. So do all words have different ways of pronunciation? No, definitely not. Most of the words in English have same way of pronunciation. Some words, when it comes to the pronunciation, example, schedule and schedule, most of us think one is right. Whatever we have learned, schedule or schedule, we think that that is right, but actually both are right. One is American, one is British. So many teachers have confusion when it comes to pronunciation. So which one do we follow, American or British? So no, there are no hard and fast rules to say which one is more standard or which one is meaningful. All the accents are meaningful. It is just the way they are pronounced are different. But we can come to a general consensus that our education system having been derived from Britishers, English is introduced in India by the Britishers. Our education system, our judiciary system, our legal system, all of them are borrowed from Britishers. And we Indians are basically conservative, like Britishers, logical or practical like Americans. We can say that we can follow most of the words when it comes to pronunciation, and the accent that we follow is British. But for many words, now we have reached a stage where most of the words have an Indianized way of pronunciation, a separate pronunciation. So if you take the word like example, past, right? So a Britisher would say past as past, whereas an American would pronounce it as past. But a typical average Indian would pronounce it as past. So now here you can see three different ways of pronunciation. So the typical Indian way of saying it past is what we refer to as neutral accent. So the goal of teaching accent or pronunciation is not to follow American or British accent, but it is more of deciding what is more used in our environment. So if past is used by Indian speakers, it is accepted. Now here we need to go back to grammaticality versus acceptability. So if you go by the standard, you have to either imitate a Britisher or an American and say past or past. But most of the Indians typically would say past. So past is now acceptable in what we call as neutral accent or general Indian English, as we refer to. So this is where we can use the concept of acceptability. So past, saying past is not wrong. It is acceptable in Indian English. So past is fine, but we have to make sure that sometimes due to regional language differences, mother tongue influence can affect the pronunciation. So past is still fine, even if we don't say American or British accents. But instead of past, if you say, for example, in a language, if they say fur is a dominant language, instead of past, if you say fast, it sounds like the English word fast, fast, running fast. So it can easily affect your meaning. So this is how acceptability can play an important role when it comes to spoken English, or the way we pronounce words. Next is stress. So stress is the degree of emphasis given to a sound or a syllable in speech. So how much stress is given to a particular syllable in a speech? Now, example, if you take meat, there's only one syllable. So the stress is given in the beginning of the word. Now look at the next example, barber. Here we have two syllables, bar and bur. Now a typical native speaker would pronounce this as barber, barber. So the stress is on the first syllable, ba, and the stress on the second syllable is a little lower. And also another thing to notice in this example is a typical native speaker, when they pronounce this word, they would say baba. So the R in the first syllable and the R in the second syllable, both are silent, baba. But a typical Indian would say barber. So in an Indian context, barber, with the both the R sounds visible or clearly felt in pronunciation, is actually acceptable. So if a majority of Indian speakers pronounce it as barber, it is accepted based on acceptability. But this pronunciation may not be accepted if you go and utter this word in a native speaking English country. Look at the next example, abdomen. All of you know this word abdomen. So a native speaker tends to pronounce, so the right pronunciation of this word, the stress is given to the first syllable. So typically the right pronunciation would be abdomen. But most of the Indian speakers have developed a neutral accent under which this word would be said as abdomen. Do you notice the difference? Abdomen. Most of the Indian speakers don't say abdomen as abdomen. A typical Indian speaker would pronounce it as abdomen, right? So this is what we refer to, variation. Variation in terms of usage. Though what we have, what we call, there is a standard of pronunciation. When it comes to the actual speech, the acceptability varies from region to region, depending on the way we use English. Next is rhythm. Rhythm, Ismail sir, I'll just need 5 minutes
Yeah, please, sir.
because yeah, we yes. So yeah, next is rhythm. So what is rhythm? English is termed as a rhythmical language. Some languages are rhythmical, some languages are not rhythmical languages. We understand the word rhythm better as teachers when we think about rhymes and poems, isn't it? So the rhyming scheme in the poems and the rhymes actually offers rhythm. So when the rhythm is followed, it sounds, the utterance of such language, the usage of such language sounds rhythmical. So rhythm has to do with the effect that is felt when we use a language. But in general, when we apply it to speech, it is the effect of stress at repeated intervals of time. So English is considered as a stress timed language, or considered to have stress timed syllabus. We understand this when somebody uses or pronounces the language correctly. If you notice this example, go and post this card at once, right? If you know the right way of using this, if you follow the right stress patterns, this sounds like go and post this card at once, go and post this card at once. So carefully in the connected speech, if you try to segment this into one stress instance to another stress instance, you will see that the time gap between one stress instance and the other stress instance, the stress groups, is equally the same. So the time taken to say go and, the time taken to say post this, the time taken to say card it, and then the time taken to say once. All these time intervals are same. So this way of speaking is common in English, and then this is what actually makes English as a rhythmical language. Assimilation. This is also one exclusive feature of spoken English, where the way in which one word can change the sound of another word. How does this happen? Now, if you see these examples, good and boy, if you say some separately, good ends with a duh and b starts with the b, the sound b. But when you in connected speech, when you pronounce them together, you say good boy. Especially native speakers, if you see good boy, right? Nice girl, nice ends with sa, and girl, the girl starts with g. But in the connected speech, right, when you say it together, the sa becomes za. Nice girl, nice girl. So this is how a sound can affect the neighboring sound in the next word. This is referred to as assimilation, and this is very important when it comes to understanding native English speech. That is why when we watch English movies, most of the time, most of the utterances appear new to us. We can't follow it naturally. That's because of lot of assimilations and structures. Next is elision, the omission of sound in or a syllable in connected speech. This is very common for when it comes to spoken English. For example, I am, the contracted form, I am. So the a is missing here. And letters. In written English, we use the full forms. In spoken English, we use the contracted forms. So letters, when we say the contracted form, let's. So the sound represented by this U alphabet is actually missing. Waste of money. If you separately say, pronounce off, you say off, fa is felt. But when connected speech, when you pronounce this expression, you say waste of money, waste of money, waste a money. If you separate a, the off becomes a. Next, pitch. Pitch refers to the degree of highness or lowness in a voice. So all these aspects make spoken English different. Intonation is the variation of pitch. For example, in statements, we talk about the falling tone, right? We are here. We are here. So in the beginning, the tone is high, but as we move forward, the tone is lower. Next, shut the door. Command. When it is a command, shut the door. So initially high and finally the tone falls down, right? But when it comes to question, the tone gradually raises. Shut the door, shut the door. So the tone, this is how tone can actually change the meaning. And lastly, these are some features distinct. There are some other distinct features which make the spoken variety different. Dialect, for example, we've already discussed about dialect. It is the distinctive way of grammar and pronunciation or speech, which changes, which can change for one language from place to place. And opening and closing. Spoken English normally has separate structures for opening and closing statements. Opening statements like hi, hello, how are you, right? So these kind of statements, there are fixed structures which we commonly follow for opening as well as closing. Turn taking, right? In spoken English, turn taking happens very logically and meaningfully, as if it is pre-decided by somebody. Speakers and listeners know when exactly to offer and also take turns. Adjacency pairs. So adjacency pairs are like a fixed pair of expressions. For example, when you greet somebody, it is often expected that you greet back, right? Hello to hello. And when you say how are you, the answer expected is I am fine. A question to an answer. When a question is asked, you don't respond by asking another question. The answer is always expected as an answer. This is what we refer to as adjacency pairs. Now, back channels are expressions like, oh, I see, uh huh. So, these expressions are used to support what the other person is saying and telling him we are listening to you. And when we don't know what to say, sometimes we say and so on. We don't know what next. So and so on and on and on. Or we say whatever, or sort of, kind of, right? When we are not sure. This is called vague language. Contractions, as you know, short forms, can't, wouldn't, shouldn't. These are exclusive features of spoken English, not written English. And tag questions. So question tags are also only an exclusive part of spoken English and not written English. Discourse markers. Because spoken English is not planned, normally we make use of discourse markers like and so, but these kind of linkers are used or repeated a lot. So all these distinctive features make spoken discourse unique. So this is the last item in our discussion. So having discussed all these different aspects of spoken English, this is a very important term for us to understand. Grammar of spoken English. So what do we mean by this term grammar of spoken English? Is this a different kind of grammar? Do we have different types of grammars? Is this different from written grammar? So the answer is definitely no. Grammar is same. The grammar is same for the entire language. The only thing is now if you try to apply all the discussed about spoken English, if we apply that now to this question or term, we will understand how spoken English is different from written English. When it comes to written English, language alone plays a major role. So grammar becomes very, very important. Just like punctuation marks and right spelling is important in written English. Similarly, what makes the grammar of spoken English is different is apart from language, right? Apart from language, these features like all these distinctive features which we have seen so far, incomplete expressions and vague expressions, false starts, and non-verbal elements like tone, pitch, rhythm, accent, etc. So all these together, right pronunciation, all these constitute what is called the grammar of spoken English. So when it comes to spoken English, it is not only about grammar, it's all about grammar. Even if it is a little less grammatical, it is still okay. So when we learn spoken English or encourage spoken English in our classrooms, we need to take care of, we need to be aware of all these aspects and see that we learn. So the best way to learn spoken English, that is why is to expose ourselves to spoken discourses rather than written discourses. This is the most important learning that I want you to take away from this class. So if you want to learn spoken English faster, make sure you expose yourself to spoken discourses a lot rather than written discourses. So with this, I'd like to conclude my session, and we'll move on to question and answer session. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. You can stop sharing your screen.
Here is a question, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, from Nagalakshmi Garu, West Godavari district. What she asks that, what elements should we follow for primary school children, either grammatically or acceptability?
Yes.
This is her doubt. That's what she expressed.
Yes, madam. As madam, that's a good and very relevant question. As I said, when we are at the initial levels of learning a language, whether it is our children or ourselves, we should not focus more on grammaticality. First, as I said, the primary goal should be fluency. Means we should encourage our students. If this goal is for us as teachers, we need to make sure we are exposed to good spoken discourses so that we improve the fluency. If it applies to the classroom situation, we encourage our children to speak in English. Whenever our children speak in English, we should give prime importance to the sense or meaning rather than how grammatical they are. Because if we start focusing on grammar right from the primary level, right, this can actually create a language, what we call language phobia among children. if you start focusing on grammaticality right from the beginning, students will get indirect meaning that I am not good at English, I am making so many mistakes in English. So unknowingly we get into what we call as language phobia. Many teachers even now have this phobia, knowingly, unknowingly. That is why even though they have basic English, they are afraid to open their mouth in a public place. But the right way of judging somebody's communication is by the sense that they make, the meaning that they make, not to what extent they are grammatical. Unfortunately, when it comes to English, right? Most teachers judge other teachers and other people by the amount of grammar that that somebody knows or somebody can use. This is very unfortunate, but this should not be the case, both for us as individuals as well as teachers.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, I have a connected question with this.
Yes, sir.
Arundhati Chamaduru, fluency and accuracy both are very important for language. But for primary level, which one is most important?
Definitely, as I said, fluency should be the primary goal for the primary class learners. When I say primary, I don't really mean first to fifth standard as we normally call. Primary, when I say primary, applies to the primary level of language proficiency. In most of the government schools, as I hear from teachers, they say the students in the high school are actually very basic when it comes to English. So even if you are referring to high school students who are not very good in English, who are very basic level, they are also primary. Primary, not in terms of standard or class, primary in terms of language proficiency. So when you are talking about primary learners, whether it is your students as it is you, your primary goal should be, most important goal should be encourage fluency. Encouraging fluency means do not focus more on grammaticality. Do not look too much at grammar, right? So look at the meaning rather. We have actually had two examples today, right? Sample conversation where we saw how, in spite of not being grammatical, language can still carry forward the meaning. Because after all, as we know, speaking is a skill. So any skill, the more you use it, the more you develop it. So being afraid of mistakes, if you do not open your mouth, then your language will never improve. So in spite of mistakes at any level, whether it is you or your children, you should continue to use English. Only then will you attain fluency. Once somebody attains a basic fluency level, then the focus can be shifted to accuracy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, another question from Geddaluru Prakasam district, sir.
Yes.
What he asked, what is the difference between proficiency and fluency?
Yeah, proficiency is a very general term which we use to refer to how good one is at a language. So, proficiency is not different from accuracy and fluency. Proficiency is the measure of one's language capability. So, proficiency is the more general term which can include both fluency and accuracy. So the amount of fluency, the amount of accuracy together decides the amount of one's proficiency. Though we often refer to these as interchangeably, we use them, but this is the difference. Both fluency and accuracy go into one's measure of a language, which is proficiency. That is why we say proficiency test. So the test is to measure how much knowledge do they have in the skills, all the skills LSRW, in knowledge and then vocabulary and as well as grammar, which is a broader term. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Another question, Karnam V. Prasad from Nellore. Is paralinguistic features are not necessary for primary learners? Whether it is necessary?
No, definitely they are important, sir. Paralinguistic features, including body language, for example. So whether you consider important, whether we consider important or not, for example, body language. When somebody is in the initial stages of learning or using a language, body language plays a very important role. So of course, body language is something that we don't teach students. So teachers cannot plan. For example, today I will teach my students how to use expression, how to smile, how to use their body, or how to use their hand gestures. This is not something that they can plan. Students also, when they try to communicate, they naturally try to take the help of hand gestures or voice or expressions to some extent. But in this case, I would say teacher should be a good model for using appropriate body language when he or she communicates in the class. So if the teacher can successfully use body language along with the language, then students get good examples or good models. So they pick up how to use body language. This is one of the primary goals of being a language teacher, not just using language correctly, but also assisting it with appropriate body language. That is about body language. Now, when it comes to voice, prosodic features like voice, rhythm, accent tone, same thing applies, sir. In the primary classrooms, most of the language is not taught. Some of it is taught, some of it is caught automatically, which means our own style of pronunciation, our own style of using the language itself is the input for the student. So if the teacher, whenever he utters English in the classroom, if the teacher uses proper, right, appropriate English, that is an input. You don't have to teach this. So it is very important, not from a teaching point of view. The teacher has to make sure he or she uses all these features rightly with the help of training programs or reading books, etc. But whenever the teacher use it rightly so that students naturally pick up these things from you. Because direct teaching of this can happen only at higher levels, not in the primary levels.
Thank you, sir. Srinivas sir, do you have any questions with you?
Yeah. Thank you, Suman Bandikaru. You have explained everything well. At the end, I just wanted to tell to our participant that in Abhyasa app, you're writing assessments in the library section by clicking spoken English, and you are finding the date and you're writing. And similarly, in the course section also, we made a course on spoken English series, and you can also enroll into that, and you can do that same course. The same material will be there. In some of the phones, the course may not be supported, but don't worry, you can write in the library section, and that holds good well. So try to do that online course. It also will work after some. Okay. Thank you, Ismail. Please conclude.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, can I ask last question?
Yes, sir, sure.
It's my question. I have seen persons, those who are good at drafting written English, but they are not much comfortable with spoken English. They are facing a lot of trouble to speak.
Yes.
Why the variations in the different levels? Those who are good in the drafting, but they are finding lack of vocabulary, the repeated same words when they used to talk.
That's a very good and very keen observation. Though it is a reality, not many of us are actually aware of this. This can happen due to the kind of exposure, the kind of practice one does. For example, if I am a user who uses English primarily through the spoken mode, I use, as well as my modes of exposure also are spoken discourses, then chances are that I develop my spoken English. My spoken English will be better than my written English. But some people, by the way of their professional demands, usually writing is actually a professional demand or a formal demand. So there are some people who will have to write a lot as a part of their professions. In fact, even if you consider teachers do not write as they speak. The writing that they do is only correction, writing small remarks, feedbacks for students. Otherwise, teachers don't write too much. Maybe they fill their school reports, which is a kind of daily routine. But when you think of administrative staff, for example, administrative staff working in colleges or offices or various establishments, their primary way of communicating is writing. They write more than they speak. And because these are standard contexts, most of the discourses, right, they prepare records, they write notices, they prepare letters for communication. All of these are very, very formal in nature. So they copy and they deal, they write, they produce, they're exposed to similar stuff on a continuous basis. So whatever you are more exposed to, your language becomes that. So that is why people who are very good at preparing drafts, administrative clerks, or people involved in administration may not be that good at speaking. They might not have had exposure of spoken English. So it all depends on exposure and usage. What discourses are you exposed to? What discourses do you use on a regular basis?
Thank you very much, Suman sir. Really amazing presentation, very useful topic we had today. I request all the teachers to go through the video if necessary again and again, and you can learn many things. Thanks for sticking to us and listening and watching these webinars on Facebook as well as YouTube. So thank you, Suman Bandi garu, for nice presentation and motivating us. And I also thanks Pokri Srinivas garu for moderating.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Will come another topic tomorrow on the day 3 with active listening for better spoken English by Dr. K. N. Shobha garu. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Thank you.